Alrighty, welcome back, and good morning to you too, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in to another thrilling episode of whatever we're calling this stream now. Fraggoth reads. I am the reader, Fraggoth, and we are going to read some more of Endymion by Dan Simmons, the sequel to Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, collectively known as the Hyperion Cantos. Significant developments. Let's see. So Raul and Endymion's attempted reconnaissance mission on the fishing platform on Mare Infinitus ends pretty disastrously. He is not only found out, he is caught, he is shot at, he is damaged by knives, he is attacked by space sharks, and, Mare Infinitus sharks anyway, and generally doesn't have a good time. Also, he picks up a delightful little fungal infection there, which has him laid low for 13 days. Fortunately, he is rescued by Aenea and Bettik, who drag him through the portal. They wind up on Hebron, which is former Jewish colony, basically, colony world, which has been mysteriously abandoned by everybody, as though they dropped everything that they were doing all at one moment and just poof, disappeared. Rather suspicious that. More on that later. And so after, so they take care of Raul. Fortunately, the power is still running, though it does go out as they're leaving. And they're able to get Raul fixed up at a hospital. And they travel down to the next Farcaster portal and end up in Stygian blackness and much, much colder. They are in some sort of an ice cave. Meanwhile, back on Mare Infinitus, Father-Captain Federico deSoya has finally got the first tangible lead in the last however long, 2 months, of Aenea and her band's progress. And it comes in the form of the hawking mat that Raul and Endymion had to leave behind. So we're going to pick up, I think, with Federico deSoya, actually. Let me check. Let me check and also bracket out a few pages. Yes, I believe we do. Yes. We get some more politics, I think, today. All right, that's page what? Let's skip ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's get another one in there. Yikes, how long is this chapter? Jeez Louise. Hopefully this one's a little short. Okay, yeah. That should be fine. I had a bookmark. I lost it. There it is. I found it again. It's hiding from me. Alrighty. So let me just splash the inside of my face with some water. And, yeah. We'll get right down to it.
35. Father-Captain deSoya uses the power of the papal disci in ways he has never before attempted. Mare Infinitus Station 326 mid-littoral, where the hawking mat was discovered, is declared a crime zone and put under martial law. deSoya brings in Pax troops and ships from the floating city of St. Therese, and brings all of the former Pax garrison and the fishing guests under house arrest. When St. Therese's governing prelate, Bishop Melandriano, protests this high-handedness and argues the limits of the papal disci, deSoya goes to the planetary governor, Archbishop Jane Kelly. The archbishop bows to the papal disci and silences Melandriano under threat of excommunication. Appointing young Lieutenant Sproul as his assistant and liaison during the investigation, deSoya brings in Pax forensic experts and top investigators from St. Therese and the other large city platforms to carry out the crime scene studies. Truth Tell and other drugs are administered to Captain C. Dobbs Powell, who is being held under arrest in the station's brig, the other members of the former Pax garrison there, and to all the fishermen who had been present. Within a few days, it becomes obvious that Captain Powell, the late Lieutenant Belius, and many of the other officers and men of this remote platform had been conspiring with area poachers to allow illegal catches of local game fish, to steal Pax equipment, including one submersible that had been reported as sunk by rebel fire, and to extort money from fishing guests. None of this interests Father-Captain deSoya. He wants to know precisely what happened on that evening 2 standard months earlier. Forensic evidence mounts. The blood and tissue on the hawking mat are DNA tested and transmitted back to the Pax records station in St. Therese and at the orbital Pax base. Two distinct strains of blood are found. The majority is positively identified as the DNA pattern. Oh my god!
If the machines call me one more time, I'm going to insert malicious code into their subsystems.
Thankfully, the collar blocking actually worked for once. It made me jump 3 feet in the air. Don't worry about it. That's why I may have... Where were we?
Right.
Forensic evidence mounts. The blood and tissue on the hawking mat are DNA tested and transmitted back to the Pax records section in St. Therese and at the orbital Pax base. 2 distinct strains of blood are found. The majority is positively identified as the DNA pattern of Lieutenant Belius. The second is unidentified in Mare Infinitus Pax records, despite the fact that every Pax citizen on the Sea World has been typed and recorded.
So how did Belius's blood end up on the flying carpet?
Asks Sergeant Gregorius.
According to everyone's testimony under Truth Tell, Belius was knocked in the drink long before the fellow they captured tried to escape on the mat.
deSoya nods and steeples his fingers. He has turned the former director's... I can't flip pages fast enough. He has turned the former director's office into his command center, and the platform is very crowded with 3 times its former population now aboard. 3 large Pax Sea Navy frigates are at sea anchor off the platform, and 2 of them are combat submersibles. The former skimmer deck is full of Pax aircraft, and engineers have been brought in to repair and extend the Thopter deck. Just this morning, deSoya has ordered another 3 ships to the area. Bishop Melandriano transmits his written protests at the mounting costs at least twice a day. Father-Captain deSoya ignores them. I think our unknown stopped to pull the lieutenant out of the... how did you call it, Sergeant? Out of the drink. They struggled. The unknown was injured or killed. Belius tried to make it back to the station. Powell and the others killed him by mistake.
Aye, says Gregorius. That's the best scenario I've heard.
In the hours since the DNA results were transmitted back from St. Therese, they had woven many others. Plots with poachers, conspiracies between the unknown and Lieutenant Belius, Captain Powell murdering former conspirators. This theory is the simplest.
It means that our unknown is one of those traveling with the girl.
says deSoya, and he has a merciful, if stupid, side to him. Morning to you too, Derpy Shark. Long time no see.
You missed all the shark action last week, Derpy Shark. So many space sharks, so little time.
And he has a merciful, if stupid, side to him.
Or he could have been a poacher, says Gregorius. We'll never know.
deSoya taps his fingertips together and looks up. Why not, Sergeant?
Well, Captain, the evidence is all down there, ain't it, sir?
He says, jerking a thumb toward the surging violet sea outside the windows.
The Navy boys here say it's 10,000 fathoms deep or more. That's almost 20,000 meters of water, sir. Any bodies there have been eaten by the fishes, sir. And if he was a poacher who got away, well, we'll never know. And if he was an off-worlder, well, there aren't any Central Pax DNA records. We'll have to search the files on several hundred worlds. We'll never find him.
Father-Captain deSoya drops his hands and smiles thinly. This is one of those rare times where you are wrong, Sergeant. Watch. Oh, excellent. You did get caught up. Wondrous. Very good. I'm so glad that YouTube makes it relatively easy to order these and make them work out okay. Again, though, if somebody ever finds another streaming service that does more or less the same thing that isn't YouTube, I'll happily switch to it in a heartbeat. I would still upload them to YouTube, I guess. I don't know. This is one of those rare times where you are wrong, Sergeant. Watch. In the next week, deSoya has every poacher within a 1,000-kilometer radius rounded up and... Why is there a hyphen there? Questioned under truth tell. I don't know why there's a hyphen there. In the next week, deSoya has every poacher within a 1,000-kilometer radius rounded up and questioned under truth tell. The rounding up involves 24 sea naval ships and over 8,000 Pax personnel. The cost is enormous. Bishop Melandriano becomes apoplectic and flies to Station 326 mid-littoral to stop the madness. Father-Captain deSoya places the cleric under arrest and has him flown to a remote monastery 9,000 kilometers away near the polar ice caps. deSoya also decides to search the ocean bottom. You won't find anything, sir, says Lieutenant Sproul. There are so many predators down there that nothing organic makes it 100 fathoms deep, much less to the bottom. And according to our soundings this week, that's 12,000 fathoms. Besides, there are only 2 submersibles on Mare Infinitus that can operate at that depth. The reason that the depth changes is because it is all oceanic. And I don't think this is specifically stated, but so this is, I guess, technically surmise on my part. Because the world is entirely covered in ocean, and it has 3... It's actually a moon of... I think it's a moon that it is. But anyway, there's a lot of gravitational pulls on it, so the actual sea depth changes considerably over time, depending on when you are, so you have to keep checking it. It's a nice little detail. It actually tracks and makes sense. Where are we? There are only 2 submersibles on Mare Infinitus that can operate at that depth. I know, says deSoya. I've ordered them here. They will arrive tomorrow with the frigate Passion of Christ. For once, Lieutenant Sproul is speechless. deSoya smiles. You are aware, aren't you, son, that Lieutenant Belius was a born-again Christian, and his cruciform was not recovered? Sproul's mouth hangs open for a moment. Yes, sir. I mean, yes, but, sir, to be resurrected, don't they need to find the body intact, sir? Not at all, Lieutenant, says Father-Captain deSoya. Merely a good-sized segment of the cross we all bear. Many a good Catholic has been resurrected from a few centimeters of intact cruciform and a bit of flesh that can be DNA typed and grown to order. Sproul shakes his head. But, sir, it's been over 9 big tides, sir. There's not a square millimeter of Lieutenant Belius or his cruciform left, sir. That's a giant feeding tank out there, sir. deSoya walks to the window. Perhaps, Lieutenant. Perhaps. But we owe it to our fellow Christian to make every attempt, do we not? Besides, if Lieutenant Belius were to be granted the miracle of resurrection, he has to stand charges for theft, treason, and attempted murder, doesn't he? Using the most advanced techniques available to them, the local forensic experts are available to filter. The local forensic expert... Okay, let's just try it from the top. Using the most advanced techniques available to them, the local forensic experts are available to lift unidentified fingerprints from a mess hall coffee cup, in spite of the many washings the cup has undergone over the past 2 months. Of the thousands of latent prints, all are laboriously identified as belonging to garrison troops or visiting fishermen, except for this one reconstructed print. It is set aside with unidentified DNA evidence.
During the web days,
Says Dr. Holmer Rheum, the chief forensic officer,
the mega datasphere would have put us in touch with central hegemony files within seconds via the Flat Nine. We could get a match almost instantly.
If we had some cheese, we could have a ham and cheese sandwich, replies Father-Captain deSoya. If we had some ham.
What?
Says Dr. Rheum. Never mind, says deSoya. I expect to have a match within days. Dr. Rheum is puzzled.
How, Father-Captain? We've checked the planetary databanks, run checks against every poacher you've captured, and I have to say there's never been a mass arrest like this on Mare Infinitus before. You're upsetting a delicate balance of corruption that has existed here for centuries.
deSoya rubs the bridge of his nose. He has not slept much in the past weeks. I am not interested in the delicate balances of corruption, Doctor.
I understand, says Rheum, but I fail to understand how you can expect a match within days. Neither the Church nor Pax Central has files of all the citizens on various Pax worlds, much less of the Outback and Ouster areas.
All Pax worlds keep their own records, says deSoya quietly, of baptisms and cross-sacraments, of marriages and deaths, military and police records. Dr. Rheum opens his hands in helplessness.
But where would you start?
Where the odds are the best in finding him, answers Father-Captain deSoya. That's right. Knock the mic over. Meanwhile, nothing is found of the hapless Lieutenant Belius within the 600-fathom depths to which the 2 deep-sea submersibles agree to descend. Hundreds of rainbow sharks are stunned to the surface and the contents of their stomachs analyzed. Still no Belius, neither remnants of him nor his cruciform. Thousands of other sea scavengers are harvested within a 200-click radius, and bits of 2 poachers are identified in gullets, but no sign of Belius or the stranger. A funeral mass is held on Station 326 mid-littoral for the lieutenant, who is said to have died the true death and found true immortality. deSoya orders the deep-sea submersible captains to go deeper, looking for artifacts. The captains refuse. "Why?" demands the priest captain. "I brought you here because your machines can go to the bottom. Why won't you?"
The lantern mouths, says the senior of the 2 captains. To search, we'll have to use lights. To 600 fathoms, our sonar and deep radar can detect them rising, and we could beat them to the surface. Below that, and we wouldn't have a chance. We won't go deeper.
"You will go deeper," says Father-Captain deSoya, the papal disky glowing against the black of his cassock. The senior captain takes a step closer.
You can arrest me, shoot me, excommunicate me. I won't take my men and machine down to certain death. You haven't seen a lantern mouth, Father.
deSoya sets a friendly hand on the captain's shoulder. "I will not arrest, shoot, or excommunicate you, Captain, and I will see a lantern mouth soon. Perhaps more than one." The captain does not understand. "I've ordered in 3 more of the Ocean Fleet's attack submarines," says deSoya. "We are going to find, flush, and kill every lantern mouth and any other threatening cant within 500 clicks. When you dive, the area will be completely safe." The senior captain looks at the other deep-sea submersible captain and then back to deSoya. Both of the captains appear to be in shock.
Father-Captain, sir, do you know how much a lantern mouth is worth? To the off-world sport fishermen and the big factories at Therese, sir.
About 15,000 Mare Sidons, says deSoya. That's about 35,000 Pax Florins, almost 50,000 Mercantilis marks, each. deSoya smiles. And since you two will receive 30% finder's fees for locating the mouths for the Navy, I wish you good hunting. The two deep submersible captains hurry out the door. One sec. Sorry about that. For the first time, deSoya sends someone else off in the Raphael to run his errands. Sergeant Gregorius travels alone in the Archangel, carrying the DNA and fingerprint information, as well as threads from the hawking mat. Remember, says deSoya over tight beam from the platform a few minutes before Raphael spins up to total quantum state, there's still a heavy Pax presence on Hyperion, and at least 2 torch ships in system at all times. They will bring you to the capital of St. Joseph's for a proper resurrection. Lashed to his acceleration couch, Sergeant Gregorius only grunts. His face looks relaxed and calm on camera, despite his imminent death. 3 days there, of course, continues deSoya, and, I would think, no more than 1 day to go through the files, and then you return.
Got it, Captain, says Gregorius. I won't waste any time in any Jacktown bars.
Jacktown, says deSoya. Oh, yes, the old nickname for the capital. Well, Sergeant, if you want to spend your one real evening on Hyperion in a bar, be my guest. It's been a dry few months with me. Gregorius grins. The clock says 30 seconds before quantum leap and his painful extinction.
I ain't complaining, Captain.
Very good, says deSoya. Have a good trip. Oh, and Sergeant?
Yes, sir.
10 seconds. Thank you, Sergeant. There is no response. Suddenly, there is nothing on the other end of the coherent tachyon tight beam. Raphael has made its quantum leap. Five lantern mouths are tracked and killed by the Navy. deSoya flies to each carcass in his command thopter. Good Lord, they're larger than I could have imagined, he said to Lieutenant Spruill when they arrive on the spot where the first one floats. The grub white beast is easily 3 times the size of the station platform, a mass of eye stalks, gaping maws, fibrillating gill slits, each the size of the thopter, pulsating tendrils extending hundreds of meters, dangling antennae, each carrying a cold light lantern of great brilliance, even out here in the daylight, and mouths, many mouths, each large enough to swallow a fleet submarine. As deSoya watches, the harvesting crews are already flocking over the pressure-exploded carcass, sawing off tendrils and eye stalks and cutting the white meat to portable cubes before the hot sun spoils it all. Satisfied that the area is cleared of mouths and other deadly cants, the 2 deep-dive captains take their submersibles 12,000 fathoms down. There, amid forests of tube worms the size of old earth redwood trees, they find an amazing array of old wrecks. Poacher submersibles crushed to the size of small suitcases by the pressure, one naval frigate that has been missing for more than a century. They also find boots. Dozens of boots. It's the tanning process, says Lieutenant Sproul to deSoya as the two watch the monitors. "It's an oddity, but it was true on old Earth as well. Some of the oldest deep-sea salvage operations. A surface ship called the Titanic, for instance, never turned up bodies, but the sea's too hungry for that, but lots of boots. Something in the tanning process of leather discourages sea critters there, and here." "Bring them up," commands deSoya over the umbilical link.
"The boot? The boots?" comes back the submersible captain's voice. "All of them?"
"All of them," says deSoya. The monitors show a profusion of junk on the seabed, things lost by the platform station crew over almost 2 centuries of carelessness, personal belongings of the drowned poachers and sailors, metal and plastic garbage tossed by the fishermen and others. Most items are corroded and misshapen by deep-sea crustaceans and unimaginable pressure, but a few are new enough and tough enough to be identified. "Bag those and send them up," says deSoya as they encounter shiny objects that might be a knife, a fork, a belt buckle, "What's that?" demands deSoya.
"What?"
says the captain of the deepest submersible. He is watching the remote handlers rather than his monitors.
"That shiny thing, it looks like a handgun."
The monitor shifts its view as the submersible turns. The powerful searchlights track, return, and illuminate the object as the camera zooms in.
"It is a handgun," comes the captain's voice. "Still clean, damaged some by pressure, but basically intact."
deSoya can hear the click of the single-frame imager capturing this from the monitor.
"I'll collect it,"
says the captain. deSoya has the urge to add, "carefully," but does not speak. His years as a torch ship captain have taught him to let his people do their jobs. He watches as the grapple arm appears on the monitor and the remote handler gently lifts the shiny object.
"It could be Lieutenant Belius's flechette pistol," says Sproul. "It went over with him and hasn't been recovered yet."
"This is quite a bit farther out," muses deSoya, watching the image shift and change on the monitor.
"Well, the currents here are powerful. Weird," says the young officer. "But I have to admit that it didn't look like a flechette pistol. Too, I don't know, squarish."
"Yes," says deSoya. The underwater searchlights are flickering over the encrusted hull of a submersible that has been buried down there for decades. deSoya is thinking of his years in space and how empty that different unknown is from any ocean on the world, teeming with life and history. The priest captain is thinking about the ousters and their strange attempt to adapt themselves to space, the way these tube worms and canths and bottom-hugging species have adapted themselves to external darkness and terrible pressures. To eternal darkness and terrible pressures. Perhaps, he is thinking, the ousters understand something about humanity's future that we in the Pax have only denied.
Heresy.
deSoya shakes away the thoughts and looks at his young liaison officer. "We'll know what it is soon enough," he says. "They're bringing this load up within the hour." And hello to you too, Severo. Thanks for tuning in. Via Twitch, I think, if the icons are correct, which maybe they are. Gregorius returns 4 days after his departure. He is dead. Raphael sends out its sad beacon, a torch ship rendezvous with it 20 light minutes out, and the sergeant's body is removed and brought to the Resurrection Chapel at St. Therese. deSoya does not wait for the man's revival. He orders the courier pouch brought to him at once. Pax records on Hyperion have positively identified the DNA taken from the hawking mat, and have also matched the partial fingerprint on the cup. Both belong to the same man. Raul Endymion, born AD 3099 on planet Hyperion, not baptized. Enlisted in the Hyperion Home Guard in Thomas month of the year AD 3115, fought with the 23rd Mechanized Infantry Regiment during Ursus Uprising, 3 commendations for bravery, including 1 for rescuing a squad mate while under fire, stationed at Fort Benjing at the South Talon region of the continent of Aquila for 8 standard months, served out the remainder of his time at Khan's River Station 9 on Aquila, patrolling the jungle there, guarding against rebel terrorist activity, facility near the fiberplastic plantations. Mustered out, honorable discharge, on Lent month 15, AD 3119, AD 3119, whereabouts unknown until less than 10 standard months ago, Ascension month 23, AD 3126, when he was arrested, tried, and convicted in Port Romance, continent of Aquila, for the murder of one M. Dabil Herrig, a born-again Christian. Records showed that Raul Endymion refused offers to accept the cross and was executed by death wand 1 week after the arrest, on the 30th of Ascension month, AD 3126. His body was disposed of at sea. The death certificate and autopsy reports were notarized by the local Pax Inspector General. The next day, latent prints on the crushed, ancient 45 caliber automatic pistol brought up from the ocean floor are matched. Raul Endymion. Bits of thread from the hawking mat are not so easily identified by Hyperion tax records, but the human clerk doing the search included a handwritten note that such a mat figures prominently in the legendary Cantos, composed by a poet who had lived on Hyperion until a century or so ago. When Sergeant Gregorius is resurrected, rests a few hours, and flies to Station 326 mid-littoral to report, deSoya tells him the various findings. He also informs the sergeant that the 24 Pax engineers who have been swarming over the Farcaster portal for 3 weeks report only that there is no sign that the ancient arch had been activated, despite sightings of a bright flash by several fishermen on the platform that night. The engineers also report that there is no way to get inside the ancient core-constructed arch, nor to tell where, if anywhere, someone might have been transported through it.
Same as Renaissance V, says Gregorius, but at least you have some idea of who helped the girl escape.
Possibly, says deSoya.
It came a long way to die here, says the sergeant.
Father-Captain deSoya leans back in his chair. Did he die here, Sergeant? Gregorius has no answer. Finally, deSoya says, I think we're finished on Mare Infinitus, or will be in a day or two. The sergeant nods. Through the long bank of windows here in the director's office, he can see the bright glow that precedes the moonrise.
Where to next, Captain? Back on the old search pattern?
deSoya is also watching the east, waiting for the giant orange disk to appear above the darkened horizon. I'm not sure, Sergeant. Let's get things tidied up here. Captain Powell handed over to Pax Justice in Orbit 7 and soothed Bishop Melandriano's feathers.
If we can,
says Sergeant Gregorius. If we can, agrees deSoya. Then we'll pay our respects to Archbishop Kelly, get back to Raphael, and decide where to jump next. It may be time for us to come up with some theories on where this child is headed, and try to get there first, not just follow Raphael's shortest line pattern.
Yes, sir,
says Gregorius. He salutes, goes to the door, and hesitates there a moment.
And do you have a theory, sir, based on just the few things we've found here?
deSoya is watching the 3 moons rise. He does not turn his chair around to face his sergeant as he says, Perhaps, just perhaps. Excellent. I'm happy to hear that these go well with your lunch coffee. Good. This is good. 36. We leaned on our poles and stopped the raft's forward motion before it crashed into the ice wall. We had all of our lanterns lit now, the electric lamps throwing their beams into the frigid darkness of this ice cavern. Mist rose from the black waters and hung beneath the jagged roof of the cavern like ominous spirits of the drowned. Crystal facets distorted and then threw back the beams of puny light, making the surrounding darkness all the more profound. "Why is the river still liquid?" asked Aenea, hugging her hands under her arms and stamping her feet. She had on every layer she had brought, but it was not enough. The cold was terrible. I went to one knee at the edge of the raft, lifted a palmful of river water to my lips, and tasted. "Salinity," I said. This is as salty as Mare Infinitus' sea. Bettik played his hand lamp on the ice wall 10 meters ahead of us. It comes down to the water's edge, he said, and extends somewhat beneath it, but the current still flows. For an instant I had a surge of hope. "Shut down the lanterns," I said, hearing my voice echo in the vaporous hollow of the place. "Turn off the hand lamps." When this was accomplished, I had hoped to see a glimmer of light through or under the ice wall, a hint of salvation, an indication that this ice cavern was finite, and that only the exit had collapsed. The darkness was absolute. No amount of waiting gave us night vision. I cursed and wished for the night goggles I had lost on Mare Infinitus. If they worked here, it would have meant that light was seeping in from somewhere. We waited another moment in the blindness. I could hear Aenea's shaking, actually feel the vapor from all of our breaths. "Turn the lights on," I said at last. There had been no glimmer of hope. We played the beams on the walls, roof, and river again. Mist continued to rise and condense near the ceiling. Icicles fell constantly into the steaming water. "Where are we?" asked Aenea, trying without total success to stop the chattering of her teeth. I dug in my pack, found the thermal blanket I had packed at Martin Silenus's tower so long ago, and wrapped it around her. That will hold the heat in. No, keep it on." "We can share," said the girl. I crouched near the heating cube, turning its conductive power to maximum. 5 of the 6 ceramic faces began to glow. "We'll share it when we have to," I said. Playing the light over the ice wall that blocked our way, I said, "To answer your question, my guess is Sol Draconi Septum. Some of my richer, and tougher, Fen clients hunted Arctic wraiths there." "I concur," said Bettik. His blue skin made him look even colder than I felt as he huddled near the glowing lantern and heating cube. The micro-tent had become frost-laden and as brittle as thin metal. "That world has a 1.7 G gravity field," he said. "And since the fall and destruction of the hegemony terraforming project there, most of it is said to have returned to its state of hyperglaciation." "Hyperglaciation?" repeated Aenea. "What does that mean?" Some color was returning to her cheeks as the thermal blanket captured her warmth. "It means that most of the atmosphere of Sol Draconi Septum is a solid," said the android. "Frozen." Aenea looked around. "I think that I remember my mother talking about this place. She chased someone through here once on a case. She was Lucian, you know, so she was used to 1.5 standard gravities, but even she remembered that this world was uncomfortable. I'm surprised that the River Tethys ran through here." Bettik stood to shine his light around again, then crouched close to the glowing cube. Even his strong back was hunched against the massive gravity. "What does the guidebook say?" I asked him. He removed the small volume. "Very terse entries, sir. The Tethys had extended to Sol Draconi Septum for only a brief period before the book was published. It is in the northern hemisphere, just beyond the area the hegemony was attempting to terraform. The main attraction of this section of the river appears to have been the possibility of seeing an Arctic wraith." "That's the thing your hunter friends were after?" Aenea said to me. I nodded. "White. Lives on the surface. Very fast. Very deadly. Almost extinct during the web days, but they've made a comeback since the fall, according to the hunters I listened to. Evidently, their diet consists of the human residents of Sol Draconi Septum, what's left of them. Only the indigenes, the Hegera colonists who had gone native centuries ago, survived the fall. They're supposed to be primitive. The hunters said that the only animal the indigenes can hunt here is the wraith, and the indigenes hate the packs. Word was that they kill missionaries, use their sinews for bowstring, just as they would a wraith's." "This world was never very amenable to having the hegemony authorities here," said the android. "Legend has it that the locals were quite pleased by the fall of the Farcasters. Until the plague, of course." "Plague?" said Aenea. "A retrovirus," I said. "It trimmed the hegemony human population from several 100 million to fewer than 1 million. Most of those were killed by the few thousand indigenes here. The rest were evacuated during the early days of the Pax." I paused and looked at the girl. She looked like a sketch for a young Madonna with a thermal blanket draped around her like that, her skin glowing in the lantern and cube light. Times were rough around the old web after the fall.
So I gather, she said dryly. They weren't so bad when I was growing up on Hyperion.
She looked around at the black water lapping at the raft, up at the stalactites of ice.
I wonder why they went to all that trouble just to have a few kilometers of ice cavern on the tour.
That's the strange part, I said, nodding toward the little guidebook. It says that the main attraction is the chance of sighting an Arctic wraith. But the wraiths, at least from what I heard the off-world hunters say, don't burrow down in the ice. They live on the surface. Aenea's dark eyes were fixed on me as she absorbed the meaning of that.
So this wasn't a cavern, then?
I think not, said Bettik. He pointed to the icy ceiling 15 meters above us. The terraform attempt in those days concentrated on creating enough temperature and surface pressure in certain low areas to allow sublimation of the largely carbon dioxide and oxygen atmosphere from frozen to gaseous form.
Did it work?
Asked the girl. In limited areas, replied the android. He made a gesture toward the surrounding darkness. My guess would be that this was quite open during the days when River Tethys tourists transited this short section. Or, I should say, open except for containment fields that helped to hold in the atmosphere and hold back the more inclement weather. Those fields, I dare say, are gone. And we're locked under a mass of what the tourists used to breathe, I said. Looking toward the ceiling and then down at the plasma rifle still in its case, I muttered, I wonder how thick. Most probably several 100 meters at least, said Bettik, perhaps a vertical kilometer of ice. This was, I understand, the thickness of the atmospheric glaciation to the immediate north of the terraformed area. You know a lot about this place, I said. On the contrary, sir, he said, we have now exhausted the totality of my knowledge on the ecology, geology, and history of Sol Draconi Septum. We could ask the comlog, I said, nodding toward my pack, where I now kept the bangle. The three of us exchanged looks. Nah, said Aenea. I concur, said Bettik. Maybe later, I said, although I admit that even while I spoke, I was thinking of some of the things I should have insisted upon bringing from the EVA locker. Hazardous environment suits with powerful heaters, scuba gear, even a spacesuit would be much preferable to the inadequate cold weather gear in which we now shivered. I was thinking of shooting at the roof, trying to break through to daylight, I said, but the risk of collapsing it on us seems much greater than any chance of escape that way. I'm going to reread that so I don't weirdly emphasize things. But the risk of collapsing it on us seems much greater than any chance of escape that way. Bettik nodded. He had pulled on a strange woolen cap with long ear flaps. The usually thin-looking android now appeared downright roly-poly in all his layers of clothing. You have some plastique left in the flare pouch, Endymion. Yes, I was just thinking about that. There's enough left for half a dozen more moderate-sized charges, but I only have 4 detonators left, so we could try blasting our way up, or sideways, or through that ice wall that's blocking us, but only 4 blasts worth. The shivering little Madonna figure looked at me.
Where did you learn about explosives, Raul? In Hyperion's home guard?
Initially, I said, but I really learned how to use old-fashioned plastique clearing stumps and boulders for Averil Hume when we were landscaping the Beak Estates. I stood up, realizing that it was too cold to stay still for so long. The numbness in my fingers and toes sent that signal. We could try going back upriver, I said, stamping my feet and flexing fingers. Aenea frowned.
The next operating forecasters are always downriver.
True, I said, but maybe there's a way out upriver. We find some warmth, a way out of this cave, a place to hole up for a while, and then we worry about getting through the next portal. Aenea nodded. Good idea, sir, said the android, moving to the starboard push-pole. Before pushing off, I reset the forward mast, cutting a meter or more off so it would clear the lowest stalactites, and hung a lantern there. Another lamp at each corner of the raft, and we pushed off upstream, our lights making thin yellow halos in the freezing mist. The river was quite shallow, not quite 3 meters deep, and the poles found good traction against the bottom. But the current was very strong, and Bettik and I had to use all our strength to move the heavy raft upstream. Aenea pulled an extra pole from the back of the raft and joined me on my side, pushing and straining to move the vessel. Behind us, quickly flowing black water swelled and swirled over the stern boards. For a few minutes this terrible exertion kept us warm. I was even pouring sweat, which froze against my clothing. But 30 minutes of poling and resting, resting and poling, found us freezing again and just 100 meters upstream from where we had started. "Look," said Aenea, setting her pole down and fetching the most powerful hand lamp. Bettik and I leaned against our staffs, holding the raft in place while we stared. One end of the massive Farcaster portal was just visible, protruding from the massive blocks of ice, like a small arc of some old ground car's wheel rim locked in a bank of ice. Beyond the tiny bit of portal still exposed, the river channel narrowed and then narrowed again, until it became a fissure only a meter or so wide, until finally it disappeared beneath another ice wall. "The river must have been 5 or 6 times the width it is now at its widest," said Bettik, "if the portal arch extended from bank to bank." "Yeah," I said, exhausted and dispirited. "Let's go back to the other end." We raised our poles and floated quickly. We raised our poles and quickly floated the length of our ice gallery, covering in 2 minutes what it had taken us 30 minutes to pole upstream. All 3 of us had to use our poles to slow the raft and fend off the ice wall at the end. "Well," said Aenea, "here we are again." She shone her headlamp on the vertical ice cliffs on either side. "We could go ashore if there was a bank of some sort, but there isn't." "We could blow one with plastique," I said. Make a sort of ice cave." "Would that be any warmer?" asked the girl. Out of the thermal blanket now, she was shivering badly again. I realized that she had so little body fat that heat just poured out of her. "No," I said honestly. For the 20th time, I walked over to our tent and gear to find something that would be our salvation. Flares, plastique, the weapons, their cases now covered with the hoarfrost that was settling on everything. One thermal blanket, food. The heating cube was still glowing, and now the girl and blue-skinned man were crouching by it again. At that setting, it would last for 100 hours or so before losing its charge. If we had some good insulating material, we could make an ice cave cozy enough to keep us alive for 3 or 4 times that long at a lower setting. We did not have the insulating material. The microtent fabric was good stuff, but it had poor insulating qualities. And the thought of huddling in an ice tomb as our hand lamps and lanterns failed, which they would do quickly in this cold, just watching the heating cube cool and waiting to die, well, it made my belly hurt. I walked to the front of the raft, ran the hand lamp beam over the milky ice and black water for the final time, and said, "All right, here's what we'll do." Aenea and Bettik stared at me from the small circle of light by the heating cube. All of us were shivering. "I'm going to take some plastique, the detonators, all the fuse cord we have, the rope, a comm unit, my flashlight laser, and—" I took a breath, "and dive under this goddamned wall, let the current carry me downstream, and hope to hell it's just a cave-in and that the river opens up down there. If it does, I'll surface and set the charges where they'll do the most good. Maybe we can blow an opening for the raft. If not, we'll leave the raft behind and all swim down there." "You'll die," the girl said flatly. "You'll be hypothermic in 10 seconds. And how will you swim upstream against this current?" "That's why I'm bringing the rope. If there's a place to get out of the way of the blast there, I'll stay at the other end while we blow the opening. But if not, I tug a code on the rope and you 2 haul me back. When I get on the raft, I'll strip and wrap myself in the thermal blanket," I said. "It's 100% insulative. If I have any body heat left, I'll survive." "What if we all have to swim for it?" said Aenea in the same doubting tone. "The thermal blanket's not big enough for the 3 of us." "We bring the heating cube," I said. "Use the blanket like a tent until we warm up." "What are we warming up on?" asked the girl, her voice small. "There's no riverbank here. Why should there be one there?" I made a gesture. That's why we try to blow an opening for the raft, I said patiently. If we can't, I'll use the plastique to knock some of the ice wall down. We'll float on our own chunk of ice. Anything to get down to the next Farcaster portal.
What if we use all the plastique to get another 20 meters and there's another ice wall? Said the girl. What if the Farcaster's 50 clicks away through ice?
I started to make another gesture with my hands, but they were shaking too much. From the cold, I hope. I set them in my armpits. Then we die on the other side of this wall, I said, the vapor from my breath hanging in front of me. It's better than dying here. After a moment of silence, Bettik said, The plan seems our best chance, Endymion, but you must see the logic of this. It should be I who swims. You are recuperating, weakened by your recent wounds. I was biofactured for resistance to extreme temperatures. Not this extreme, I said. I can see you shivering. Also, you won't know where to place the charges. You can instruct me, Endymion, using your comm unit. We don't know if they'll work through this ice, I said. Besides, it'll be a difficult call. It'll be like trying to cut a diamond. The charges will have to be set in just the right places. Still, said the android, it only makes sense that It may make sense, I interrupted, but that's not the way it's going to be. This is my job. If I fail, you try. Besides, I'll need someone very strong to pull me back through the current, win or lose. I walked over and put my hand on the blue man's shoulder. I'm pulling rank on you this time, Bettik? Aenea cast off the thermal blanket despite her shivering. What rank? She demanded. I pulled myself to my full height and struck a mock-heroic pose. I'll have you know that I was a Lancer Specialist First Class in the Hyperion Home Guard. The delivery was marred only a bit by the chattering of my teeth. A private, said the child. First class, I said. The girl put her arms around me. The hug surprised me, and I lowered my arms to pat her awkwardly. First class is right, she said softly. Stepping back, stamping her feet, and blowing into her hands, she said, All right, what do we do? I'll get the things I need. Why don't you get that 100-meter section of line you used as a sea anchor on Mare Infinitus? That should be enough. Bettik, if you would please let the raft move up against the iced wall in a way that the entire stern won't be awash with the current. Perhaps by tucking the front in under that low shelf of ice there. All three of us were busy for a moment. When we reassembled at the front of the raft again, under the abbreviated mast with its fading lantern glow, I said to Aenea, Do you still think that someone or something is sending us to these specific River Tethys worlds for a reason? The girl looked around at the darkness for a few seconds. Somewhere behind us another stalactite of ice fell into the river with a hollow splash. Yes, she said. And what's the reason for this dead end? Aenea shrugged, which, under different circumstances, would have looked a bit comical. She was so swathed in layers. A temptation, she said. I did not understand. Temptation for what? I hate the cold and dark, said the girl. I always have. Perhaps someone is tempting me to use certain abilities which I have not properly explored yet, certain powers which I haven't earned. I looked down at the swirling black waters in which I would be swimming in less than a minute. Well, kiddo, if you have powers or abilities that would get us the hell out of here, I suggest you explore them and use them whether you've earned them or not. Her hand touched my arm. She was wearing an extra pair of my wool socks as mittens. I'm guessing, she said, the vapor of her breath freezing on the brim of the floppy cap she had pulled low. But nothing I will ever learn could get all three of us out of here now. I know that's true. Perhaps the temptation is... It doesn't matter, Raul. Let's just see if we can get through this icefall. I nodded, took a breath, and stripped out of everything but my underwear. The shock of cold air was terrible. Completing the knot that held the line around my chest, noticing that my fingers were already growing stiff and useless from the cold, I took the shoulder bag holding the plastique from Bettik and said, The river water may be cold enough to stop my heart. If I don't tug once, hard, within the first 30 seconds, pull me back. The android nodded. We had gone over the other rope signals I would use. Oh, if you pull me back and I am in a coma or dead, I said, trying to keep my tone matter of fact, don't forget I might be revived even after several minutes of having my heart stopped. This cold water should retard brain death. Bettik nodded again. He was standing with the rope over one shoulder and curled around his waist to the other hand, in a classic climber's belay. Okay, I said, realizing that I was delaying and losing body heat. See you guys in a few minutes. I slipped over the side into the black water. I'm going to take a sip of warm tea because this is freaking cold. I believe that my heart did stop for a minute, but then it began pounding almost painfully. The current was stronger than I had bargained for. It almost swept me down and under the ice wall before I was ready to go. As it was, it swirled me several meters to the port of the raft and banged me up sharply against the jagged ice, cutting my forehead and slamming my forearms brutally. I clung to a jagged crystal with all of my strength, feeling my legs and lower body being pulled into that subterranean vortex and struggling to keep my face out of the water. The stalactite that had fallen behind us crashed against the ice wall just half a meter to my left. If it had struck me, I would have been unconscious and drowned without knowing what had happened.
This might not be such a good idea,
I gasped, teeth chattering, before I lost my grip and was pulled under the jagged ice fall. "37. deSoya's idea is to abandon Raphael's plodding search pattern and jump directly to the first of the ouster-captured systems.
What good will that do, sir?
asks Corporal Key. Perhaps none, admits Father-Captain deSoya, but if there is an ouster connection, we might get a hint of it there. Sergeant Gregorius rubs his jaw.
Aye, he says, and we may get captured by a swarm. This ship isn't the best armed in His Holiness's fleet, if you don't mind me saying so, sir.
deSoya nods. But it's fast. We could probably outrun most swarm ships, and they may have abandoned the system by now. They tend to do that. Hit, run, push back the Pack's Great Wall, and then leave the system with only a token perimeter defense, after wreaking as much damage as they can on the world and populace. deSoya stops. He has seen only one ouster-pillaged world firsthand, Svoboda, but he hopes never to have to see another. Anyway, he says, it's the same to us on this ship. Normally, the quantum leap to beyond the Great Wall would be 8 or 9 months ship time, 11 or more years time debt. For us, it will be the usual instantaneous jump and 3 days resurrection. Lancer Rettig raised his hand, as he often did in these discussions.
There's that to consider, sir.
What? What's that?
The ousters have never captured an Archangel courier, sir. I doubt if they know this sort of ship exists. Heck, sir, most of the Pax fleet has no idea most of the Pax fleet has no idea Archangel technology exists.
deSoya sees his point immediately, but Rettig continues.
So we'd be running quite a risk, sir. Not just for ourselves, but for the Pax.
There is a long silence. Finally, deSoya speaks. That's a good point, Lancer. I've given it quite a bit of thought. But Pax Command built this ship with its automated resurrection creche just so we could go beyond Pax space. I think it's understood that we might have to follow leads into the outback, into ouster-held territory if need be. The priest captain takes a breath. I've been there, gentlemen. I've burned their orbital forests and fought my way out of swarms. The ousters are strange. Their attempts to adapt to odd environments, to space even, are blasphemous. They may no longer be human, but their ships are not fast. Raphael should be able to get in and translate back to quantum velocities if there is a threat to her capture, and we can program her to self-destruct before being captured. None of the 3 Swiss Guard troopers says a word. Each appears to be thinking about the death within death that would entail, the destruction without warning of destruction. They would go to sleep on their acceleration couches / resurrection creches as always, and simply never awaken. At least not in this life. The cruciform sacrament is truly miraculous. It can bring shattered and blasted bodies back to life, return the shape and souls of born-again Christians who have been shot, burned, starved, drowned, asphyxiated, stabbed, crushed, or ravaged by disease. But it has its limits. Too much time of decomposition defeats it, as would a thermonuclear explosion of a ship's in-system drive.
I guess we're with you.
Sergeant Gregorius says at last, knowing that Father-Captain deSoya has asked for this discussion because he hates simply ordering his men into such a risk of true death. Key and Rettig merely nod.
Good, says deSoya. I will program Raphael accordingly. That if there is no chance for her to escape before we can be resurrected, she'll trigger her fusion engines. And I'll be very careful setting the parameters for her on what no escape means. But I don't think there's much chance of that happening. We'll awaken in... My God, I haven't even checked to see which system is the first outer... My God, I haven't even checked to see which system is the first Auster-occupied Tethys world. Is it Taijin?
Negative, sir,
says Gregorius, leaning over the hard copy star chart of the search plot Raphael has prepared. His massive finger strikes down on a circled region beyond the Pax.
It's Hebron, the Jew world.
All right, then, says the priest-captain. Let's get to our couches and head for the translation point. Next year in New Jerusalem.
Next year, sir,
says Lancer Rettig, floating above the plot table before kicking off to his own couch. deSoya smiles. It's a saying I've heard from some of my Jewish friends. I don't know what it means. I didn't know that there were any Jews around anymore, says Corporal Key, floating above his own couch. I thought they all stuck to themselves in the outback. deSoya shakes his head. There were a few converted Jews at the university when I was taking courses outside the cemetery. Oh my God, how did I mangle that? My brain just went on autopilot. My mouth went on autopilot. deSoya shakes his head. There were a few converted Jews at the university when I was taking courses outside of seminary, he says. Never mind. You'll meet some soon enough on Hebron. Strap in, gentlemen. The priest-captain knows immediately upon awakening that something has, indeed, gone wrong. A few times during his wilder days as a young man, Federico deSoya has got drunk with his fellow seminarians, and on one of these outings he had awakened in a strange bed, alone, thank God, but in a strange bed in a strange part of the city, with no memory of whose bed it was or how he got there. This awakening is like that. Rather than opening his eyes to see the enclosed and automated creche couches on Raphael, smelling the ozone and recycled sweat scents of the ship, feeling the awakening to falling terror of zero gravity, deSoya finds himself in a comfortable bed, in a lovely room, in a reasonably normal gravity field. There are religious icons on the wall. The Virgin Mary, a large crucifix with the heavenly raised eyes of a suffering Christ, a painting of the martyrdom of St. Paul. Weak sunlight comes through lace curtains. All this is vaguely familiar to the stupefied deSoya, as is the kindly face of the plump little priest who brings him broth and idle conversation. Finally, Father-Captain deSoya's re-engaging synapses make the connection. Father Baggio, the resurrection chaplain he had last seen in the Vatican gardens, and had been sure he would never see again. Sipping broth, deSoya looks out the rectory window at the pale blue sky and thinks, Bacem. He struggles to recall the events that have brought him here, but the last thing he can remember is the conversation with Gregorius and his men, the long climb up out of the gravity well of Mare Infinitus, and 70 Ophiuchi A, and then the jolt of translation. How? He mumbles, grasping the kindly priest's sleeve. Why? How? No,
says Father Baggio. "Just to rest, my son. There will be a time to discuss everything later. Time for everything." Lulled by the soft voice, the rich light, and the oxygen-rich air, deSoya closes his eyes and sleeps. His dreams are ominous. By the noon meal, more broth, it becomes obvious to deSoya that kindly, plump Father Baggio is not going to answer any of his questions. Not answer how he got to Pacem, not answer where and how his men are, and not answer why he will not answer. "Father Farrell is a-comin' soon," says the resurrection chaplain, as if that explains everything. deSoya gathers his strength, bathes and dresses, tries to gather his wits, and waits for Father Farrell. Father Farrell arrives in mid-afternoon. He is a tall, thin, ascetic priest, a commander in the Legionaries of Christ, deSoya learns quickly and with little surprise, and his voice, although soft, is clipped and businesslike. Farrell's eyes are a cold gray.
"You are understandably curious," says Father Farrell, "and undoubtedly still somewhat confused. It is normal for the newly born again."
"I am familiar with the side effects," says deSoya with a slightly ironic smile, "but I am curious. How is it that I awake on Pacem? What occurred in Hebron's system? And how are my men?" Farrell's gray eyes do not blink as he speaks.
"The last question first, Father-Captain. Your Sergeant Gregorius and Corporal Key are well, recovering from resurrection in the Swiss Guard Resurrection Chapel even as we speak."
"Lancer Rettig?" asks deSoya. The sense of foreboding that has been hanging above him since his awakening now stirs its dark wings.
"Dead, I fear," says Farrell. "The true death. Last rites have been administered, and his body has been consigned to the depths of space."
"How did he die? The true death, I mean," manages deSoya. He feels like weeping, but resists because he is not sure if it is simple sorrow or the effects of resurrection.
"I do not know the details," says the tall man.
The two are in the rectory's small... Let's try this again. The two are in the rectory's small sitting room, used for meetings and important discussions. They are alone except for the eyes of saints, martyrs, Christ, and his mother. Christ's mother.
"It seems there was a problem with the automated resurrection creche upon Raphael's return from Hebron's system," continues Farrell.
"Return from Hebron?" says deSoya. "I'm afraid I do not understand, Father. I had programmed the ship to stay unless pursued by ouster forces. Was that the case?"
"Evidently," replied the legionary. "As I say, I am not acquainted with the technical details, nor am I competent in technical matters. But as I understand it, you had programmed your Archangel courier to penetrate ouster-controlled space."
"We needed to pursue our mission to Hebron," interrupts Father-Captain deSoya. Farrell does not protest the interruption, nor does his neutral expression change, but deSoya looks into those cold gray eyes and does not interrupt again.
"As I was saying, Father-Captain, according to my understanding, you programmed your ship to enter ouster space and, if unchallenged, go into orbit around the planet Hebron."
deSoya gives his silence as confirmation. His dark eyes return the gray stare, with no animosity as of yet, but ready to defend against any accusation.
"It is my understanding that I believe your courier ship is named the Raphael?"
deSoya nods. He realizes now that the careful phrasing, the questions posed when answers are known, all this is the hallmark of a lawyer. The Church has many legal consultants and inquisitors.
"The Raphael appears to have carried out your programming, found no immediate opposition during deceleration, and gone into orbit around Hebron," continues Farrell.
Is that when the resurrection failure occurred?" asks deSoya.
"It is my understanding that this is not the case," says Farrell.
The legionary's gray gaze leaves deSoya for an instant, flicks around the room as if assessing the value of the furniture and art objects there, apparently finds nothing of interest, and returns to the priest captain.
It is my understanding, he says, that all 4 of you on board were close to full resurrection when the ship had to flee the system. Translation shock was, of course, fatal. Secondary resurrection after incomplete resurrection is, as I am sure you are aware, much more difficult than primary resurrection. It is here that the sacrament was circumvented by mechanical failure. When Farrell stops speaking, there is a silence. Lost in thought, deSoya is only vaguely aware of the sound of ground car traffic on the narrow street outside, the rumble of a transport lifting from the nearby spaceport. Finally, he says, "The creches were inspected and repaired while we were in orbit around Renaissance Vector, Father Farrell." The other priest nods almost imperceptibly. "We have the records. We have the records. I believe that it was the same sort of calibration error in Lancer Rettig's automated crash. The investigation continues in Renaissance System Garrison. We have also expanded the investigation to Mare Infinitus System, Epsilon Eridani and Epsilon Indi, the world of inevitable grace in System Lacaille 9352, Barnard's World, NGC Supertext ES 2629-4 BIV, Vega System, and Tau Ceti." deSoya can only blink. "You're being very thorough," he says at last. He is thinking, they must be using both of the other Archangel couriers to carry out such an investigation. Why? "Yes," says Father Farrell. Father-Captain deSoya sighs and slumps a bit in the soft cushions of the rectory chair. "So they found us in Svoboda system and could not resuscitate Lancer Rettig." There's the slightest downward twitch of Farrell's thin lips. "Svoboda system, Father-Captain? No. It is my understanding that your courier ship was discovered in System 70 Ophiuchi A, while decelerating toward the ocean world of Mare Infinitus." deSoya sits up. "I don't understand. I'd programmed Raphael to translate to the next Pax system on her original search pattern, if she had to leave Hebron system prematurely. The next world should have been Svoboda." "Perhaps the form of its pursuit by hostile craft in the Hebron system precluded such a transition alignment," says Farrell without emphasis. "The ship's computer could have then decided to return to its starting point." "Perhaps," says deSoya, trying to read the other's expression. "It is useless." "You say, could have decided, Father Farrell. Don't you know by now? Haven't you examined the ship's log?" Farrell's silence could communicate affirmation or nothing at all. "And if we return to Mare Infinitus," continues deSoya, "why are we waking up here on Pachem? What's happened in 70 Ophiuchi A?" Now Farrell does smile. It is the narrowest extension of those thin lips. "By coincidence, Father-Captain, the Archangel courier Michael was in the Mare Infinitus garrison space when you translated. Captain Wu was aboard the Michael." "Margaret Wu?" asks deSoya, not caring if he irritates the other man by interrupting. "Precisely so." Farrell removes an imaginary bit of lint from his starched and creased black trousers. "Considering the, consternation that your previous visit had caused on Mare Infinitus, meaning my removal of Bishop Malandriano into a monastery to get him out of my way," says deSoya, "and the arrest of several treasonous and corrupt Pax officers who were almost certainly carrying out their theft and conspiracy under Malandriano's supervision." Farrell holds up one hand to stop deSoya. "These events are not under my wing of the investigation, Father-Captain. I was simply answering your question. If I may continue?" deSoya stares, feeling the anger mix with his sorrow at Rettig's death, all swirling amid the narcotic high of resurrection. "Captain Wu, who had already heard the protests of Bishop Malandriano and other Mare Infinitus administrators, decided it would be most felicitous if you were returned to Pachem for resurrection." "So our resurrection was interrupted a second time?" asks deSoya. "No." There is no irritation in Farrell's voice. The resurrection process had not been initiated in System 70 Ophiuchi A when the decision was made to return you to Pax Command and the Vatican. deSoya looks at his own fingers. They are trembling. In his mind's eye, he can see the Raphael with its cargo of corpses, his included. First, a death tour of Hebron's system, then decelerating toward Mare Infinitus, then the spin-up to Pachem. He looks up quickly.
How long have we been dead, Father?
32 days, says Farrell. deSoya almost pulls himself up out of the chair. Finally, he settles back and says in his most controlled voice, If Captain Wu decided to route the ship back here before resurrection was begun in Mare Infinitus space, Father, and if no resurrection was achieved in Hebron space, we should have been dead less than 72 hours at that point. Assuming 3 days here, where were the other 26 days spent, Father? Farrell runs his fingers along his trouser crease.
There were delays in Mare Infinitus space, he says coolly. The initial investigation was begun there. Protests were filed. Lancer Rettig was buried in space with full honors. Other duties were carried out. The Raphael returned with the Michael. Farrell stands abruptly, and deSoya gets to his feet as well. Father-Captain, Farrell announces formally, I am here to extend Cardinal Secretary Lord Dusamy's compliments to you, sir, his wish for your full recovery in health and life in the arms of Christ, and to request your presence tomorrow morning at 0700 hours at the Vatican offices of the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, to meet with Monsignor Lucas Oddi and other appointed officials of the Sacred Congregation. deSoya is stunned. He can only click his heels and bow his head in compliance. He is a Jesuit and an officer in the Pax fleet. He has been trained to discipline. Very good, says Father Farrell, and takes his leave. Father-Captain deSoya stands in the rectory foyer for several minutes after the Legionary of Christ has left. As a mere priest and a line officer, deSoya has been spared most church politics and infighting, but even a provincial priest or preoccupied Pax warrior knows the basic structure of the Vatican and its purpose. Beneath the Pope, there are two major administrative categories, the Roman Curia and the so-called Sacred Congregations. deSoya knows that the Curia is an awkward and labyrinthine administrative structure. Its modern form was set down by Sixtus V in AD 1588. The Curia includes the Secretariat of State, Cardinal Lord Dusamy's power base, where he serves as a sort of prime minister with the misleading title of Cardinal Secretary of State. This secretariat is a central part of what is often referred to as the Old Curia, used by popes since the 16th century. In addition, there is the New Curia, begun as 16 lesser bodies created by the Second Vatican Council, still popularly known as Vatican II, which concluded in AD 1965. Those 16 bodies have grown to 31 intertwining entities under Pope Julius's 260-year reign. But it is not the Curia to which deSoya has been summoned, but to one of its separate and sometimes countervailing clusters of authority, the Sacred Congregations. Specifically, he has been ordered to appear before the so-called Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, an organization that has gained, or, to be more precise, regained, enormous power in the past 2 centuries. Under Pope Julius, the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith again welcomed the Pope as its prefect, a change in structure that revitalized the office. For the 12 centuries prior to Pope Julius's election, this sacred congregation, known as the Holy Office from AD 1908 to AD 1964, had been de-emphasized to the point it had become almost a vestigial organ. But now, under Julius, the Holy Office's power is felt across 500 light-years of space and back through 3,000 years of history. deSoya returns to the sitting room and leans against the chair he had been sitting in. His mind is swirling. He knows that he will not be allowed to see Gregorius or Key before his meeting in the Holy Office the next morning. He may never see them again. deSoya tries to unravel the thread that has pulled him to this meeting, but it becomes lost in the snarl of church politics, offended clerics, Pax power struggles, and the swirl of his own befuddled, born-again brain. He knows this. The Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, previously known as the Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office, had, for many centuries prior to that, been known as the Sacred Congregation
of universal inquisition. And it is under Pope Julius XIV that the Inquisition has once again begun living up to its original name and sense of terror. And, without preparation, counsel, or knowledge of what accusations may be levied against him, deSoya must appear before them at 0700 hours the next morning. Father Baggio bustles in, a smile on the chubby priest's cherubic features. "Did you have a nice conversation with Father Farrell, my son?" That was supposed to be different. "Did you have a nice conversation with Father Farrell, my son?" "Yes," says deSoya distractedly. "Very nice." "Good, good," says Father Baggio. "But I think it's a time for a bit of broth, a bit of prayer, the Angelus, I think, and then an early beddy bye. We must be fresh for whatever tomorrow brings, mustn't we?" "38. When I was a child listening to Grandam's endless parade of verses, one short piece I demanded to hear over and over started, 'Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice.' Grandam did not know the name of the poet. She thought it might be by a pre-Hedgera poet named Frost, but even at my young age I thought that was too cute to be true for a poem about fire and ice. But the idea of the world ending in either fire or ice had long stayed with me, as enduring as the sing-song rhythm of the simple verse. My world seemed to be ending in ice. It was dark beneath the ice wall, and too cold for me to find adequate words to describe. I had been burned before. Once a gas stove had exploded on a barge going upriver on the Khans, and given me slight but painful burns over my arms and chest, so I knew the intensity of fire. This cold seemed that intense, sort of slow-motion flames cutting my flesh to shreds. The rope was secured under my arms, and the powerful current soon whirled me around so I was being dragged feet first down the black chute, my hands raised to keep my face from bashing against inverted ridges of rock-hard ice, my chest and underarms constrained by the tight rope as Bettik acted as brake by staying on belay. My knees were soon torn by razor-sharp ice as the current kept throwing my body higher, striking the uneven ceiling of passing ice like someone being dragged across rocky ground. I had worn socks with ice more in mind than the cold, but they did little to protect my feet as I banged into the ice ridges. I was also wearing undershorts and undershirt, but they provided no buffer against the needles of cold. Around my neck was the band of the comm unit, the mic patches pressed against my throat for voice or sub-vocal transmission, the hear plug in place. Over my shoulder and tightly secured with tape was the waterproof bag with the plastique, detonators, cord, and 2 flares I had put in at the last moment. Taped to my wrist was my little flashlight laser, its narrow beam cutting through the black water and bouncing off ice, but illuminating little. I had used the laser sparingly since the labyrinth on Hyperion. The hand lamps were more useful in wide beam and required less charge. The laser was largely useless as a cutting weapon, but should serve to bore holes in ice for the plastique. If I lived long enough to bore holes. The only method behind my madness of allowing myself to be swept away down this subterranean river had been a bit of knowledge from my home guard training on the ice shelf of the continent Ursus. There, on the Bearpaw Glacial Sea, where the ice froze and refroze almost daily through the brief Antarctic summer, the risk of breaking through the thin surface ice had been very high. We had been trained that even if we were swept away beneath the thickest ice, there was always a thin layer of air between the sea and icy ceiling. We were to rise to that brief layer, set our snouts into it, even if it meant that the rest of our faces had to stay submerged, and move along the ice until we came to a break or thin enough patch that we could smash our way out. That had been the theory. My only actual test of it had been as a member of a search party fanning out to hunt for a scarab driver who had stepped out of his vehicle, broken through not 2 meters from where the ice supported the weight of his 4-ton machine, and disappeared. I was the one who found him, almost 600 meters from the scarab, and safe ice. He had used the breathing technique. His nose was still pressed tight against the too thick ice when I found him, but his mouth was open under water, his face was as white as the snow that blew across the glacier, and his eyes were frozen as solid as steel bearings. I tried not to think of this as I fought my way to the surface against the current, tugged on the rope to signal A. Bettik to stop me, and scraped my face against shards of ice to find air. There were several centimeters of space between water and ice, more where fissures ran up into the glacier of frozen atmosphere like inverted crevasses. I gasped the cold air into my lungs, shone the flashlight laser into the crevasses, and moved the red beam back and forward along the narrow tunnel of ice. "Going to rest a minute," I gasped. "I'm okay. How far have I come?" "About 8 meters," whispered A. Bettik's voice in my ear. "Shit," I muttered, forgetting that the comm would send the subvocal. It had seemed like 20 or 30 meters at least. "All right," I said aloud. "I'm going to set the first charge here." My fingers were still flexible enough to trigger the flashlight laser to high intensity and burn out a small niche into the side of the fissure. I had pre-molded the plastique, and now I worked it, shaped it, and vectored it. The material was a shaped explosive. That is, the blast would discharge itself in precisely the direction I wanted, provided that my preparations were correct. In this case, I had done most of the work ahead of time, knowing that I wanted the blast directed upward and back toward the ice wall behind me. Now I aimed precise tendrils of that explosive force. The same technology that allowed a plasma bolt to cut through steel plate like hot bolts dropped into butter would send these plasma tendrils lancing back through the incredible mass of the ice behind me. It should cut the 8-meter section of ice wall into chunks and drop them into the river very nicely. We were counting on the fact that the atmosphere generators through the years of terraforming had added enough nitrogen and CO2 to the atmosphere to keep the explosion from turning into one massive blast of burning oxygen. Because I knew exactly where I wanted to aim the force of the blast, the shaping of the charges took less than 45 seconds and required little dexterity. Still, I was shaking and almost numb by the time the tiny detonator squibs were set in place. Since I knew the comm units had no trouble penetrating this amount of ice, I set the detonators to the preset code and ignored the wire in my bag. "Okay," I gasped, settling lower in the water. "Let out the slack." The wild ride began again, the current pulling me lower into blackness and then battering me against the crystal ceiling. Then the wild search for the air, the gasped commands, the struggle to see and work, while the last warmth drained from me. The ice continued for another 30 meters, right at the outer limits of what I thought the plastique could handle. I set the charges in 2 more places, another fissure and the last bundle in the narrow tube I burned into solid ceiling ice. My hands were totally numb during the last placement. It was as if I were wearing thick gloves of ice, but I directed the charges up and downstream in roughly the proper vectors. If there were not an end to this ice wall soon, all this would be in vain. A. Bettik and I had anticipated chopping away at some ice with the axe, but we could not hack our way through many meters of the stuff. At 41 meters, I burst up and out into air again. At first, I was afraid it was merely another crevasse, but when I aimed the flashlight laser, the red beam flicked through a chamber longer and wider than the one where I had left the raft. We had discussed it and decided that we would not blow the explosives if I could see the end of any second chamber, but when I lowered the beam down the length of the Black River here, illuminating the same mist and stalactites, I could see that the river, about 30 meters wide at that point, curved out of sight several hundred meters downstream. There were no more riverbanks or visible tunnels here than there had been in our earlier stretch of the river, but at least the river appeared to keep running. I wanted to see what the river did once it rounded the turn, but I had neither the rope nor body heat I needed to float that far, report, and get back alive. "Pull me back!" I gasped. For the next 2 minutes I hung on, or tried to hang on, my hands no longer worked, as the android hauled me back against that terrible current, stopping occasionally as I floated on my back and gasped in the frigid air of the crevasses. Then the black ride would begin again. If Bettik had been in the water and I had been pulling, or even if it had been the child, I could not have pulled either of them back through that heavy current in 4 times the time it took Bettik. I knew that he was strong, but no Superman, no miraculous android strength. I knew that he was strong, but no Superman, no miraculous android strength, but he showed superhuman strength that day. I could only guess at the reservoirs of energy he used to pull me back to the raft so quickly. I helped as best I could, slashing my hands by pulling myself along the icy ceiling and fending off sharper crystals, kicking weakly against the current. When my head broke the surface again, seeing the haloed lantern light and the shapes of my 2 companions leaning toward me, I did not have the strength to lift my arms or to help pull myself onto the raft. Bettik seized me under the arms and lifted me gently out. Aenea grabbed my dripping legs, and they carried me toward the stern of the raft. I admit that my dulled brain was reminded of the Catholic church we stopped by occasionally in the North Moor village of Latmos, the little town where we picked up our food and simple shepherd supplies, and of one of the large religious paintings on the south wall of that church. Christ being taken off the cross, one of his disciples' arms under his limp arms, his bare and mutilated feet being held by the Virgin. "Don't flatter yourself," came the unbidden thought through my mental fog. It spoke in Aenea's voice. They carried me to the frost-laden tent where the thermal blanket was ready on a pile of 2 sleeping bags and a thin mat. The heating cube glowed next to this nest. Bettik stripped me of my sodden undershirt, flare bag, and comm unit. He untapped the flashlight laser, set it carefully in my pack, laid me firmly within the top sleeping bag with the thermal blanket around me, and opened a med pack. Setting sticky biomonitor contacts against my chest, the inside of my thigh, left wrist, and temple, he looked at the readouts a moment, and then injected me with 1 ampule of adrenonitrotoluene. Adrenonitrotoluene. Yes, adrenonitrotoluene. Adrenonitrotoluene? Sure. Setting sticky biomonitor contacts against my chest, the inside of my thigh, my left wrist, and temple, he looked at the readouts a moment, and then injected me with 1 ampule of adrenonitro... That word's going to throw me every time. Fortunately, I don't think I ever have to read it again. And then injected me with 1 ampule of adrenonitrotoluene, as we had planned. Nitrotoluene. "You must be getting tired of pulling me out of the water," I wanted to say, but my jaws and tongue and vocal apparatus would not oblige. I was so cold that I was not even shivering. Consciousness was a slender thread connecting me to the light, and it wavered in the cold wind that blew through me. Bettik leaned closer. "Endymion, the charges are set?" I managed a nod. It was all I could do, and it seemed that I was operating a clumsy marionette to do that. Aenea dropped to her knees next to me. To Bettik she said, "I'll watch him. You get us out of here." The android left the tent to push us away from the ice wall and to pole us upstream, using the push-pole from that end of the raft. After the expenditure of energy it had taken to drag me back against the current, I could not believe he could find the strength to move the entire raft the necessary distance upriver. We began moving. I could see the lantern glow on the mist and distant ceiling through the triangular opening at the end of the tent. The fog and icy stalactites moved slowly across the tiny reference triangle, as though I were peering through an isoscelean hole in reality at the ninth circle of Dante's hell. Aenea was watching the simple medpack monitors. Raul, she whispered. The thermal blanket held in all the heat I was producing, but I felt as if I were not producing any body heat. My bones ached with the chill, but my frozen nerve ends did not convey the pain. I was very, very sleepy. Aenea shook me awake. "You stay with me, damn it!" "I'll try," I thought at her. I knew I was lying. All I wanted to do was sleep. "Hey, Bettik!" cried the child, and I was vaguely aware of the android entering the tent and consulting the medpack. Their words were a distant humming that no longer made sense to me. I was far, far away when I dimly sensed a body next to me. Bettik had gone away to pole our ice-laden raft upstream against bitter current. The child Aenea had crawled under the thermal blanket and edge of the sleeping bag with me. At first, the heat of her skinny body did not penetrate the layers of permafrost that now lay in me, but I was aware of her breathing, of the angular intrusion of her elbows and knees in the tented space with me. "Oh, no," I thought in her direction. "I'm the protector here, the strong one hired to save you." The cold sleepiness did not allow me to speak aloud. I do not remember if she put her arms around me. I know that I was no more responsive than a frozen log, no more receptive to company than one of the icy stalactites that moved across my triangular field of vision, its underside lighted by the lantern's glow, its top lost in darkness and mist, much as was my mind. Eventually, I began to feel some warmth her small body poured out. Eventually, I began to feel some of the warmth her small body poured out. The heat was dimly perceived, but my skin began to prickle with needles of pain where the warmth flowed from her skin to mine. I wished I could speak just to tell her to move away so that I could doze in nerveless peace. Some time later, it might have been 15 minutes or 2 hours, Bettik returned to the tent. I was conscious enough to realize that he must have followed our plan. Anchoring the raft with lodged push poles and steering oar somewhere in the... Okay, let's try that again. I was conscious enough to realize that he must have followed our plan. Anchoring the raft with lodged push poles and steering oar somewhere in the narrowing upper part of the ice cave under the visible segment of Farcaster Portal. Our theory had been that the metal arch might protect us from avalanche and icefall when the charges went off. "Blow the charges," I wanted to say to him. Instead of keying the comm band, however, the android stripped to his tropical yellow short pants and shirt, then crawled under the thermal blanket with the girl and me. It should have been comical. It may sound comical to you as you read this, but nothing in my life had moved me as deeply as this act, this sharing of warmth by my two traveling companions. Not even their brave and foolhardy rescue of me in the Violet Sea had touched me so deeply. The three of us lay there, Aenea on my left, her left arm around me, Bettik on my right, his body curled against the cold that crept in under the corner of the thermal blanket. In a few minutes I would be weeping from the pain that came from returning circulation, from the agony of thawing flesh. But at this moment I wept at the intimate gift of their warmth as life's heat flowed from both child and blue-skinned man, flowed from their blood and flesh to mine. I weep now at the telling of it. In the telling of it. How long we stayed that way I cannot say. I never asked the two of them, and they never spoke of it. It must have been at least an hour. It felt like a lifetime of warmth and pain and the overpowering joy of life's return. Eventually I began trembling, then shaking slightly, and then shaking violently, as if possessed by seizures. My friends held me then, not allowing me to escape from the warmth. I believe that Aenea was also weeping by that point, although I have never asked, and in later days she never spoke of it. Finally, after the pain and palsy had largely passed, Bettik slipped out from under our common cover, consulted the medpack, and spoke to the child in a language I could once again comprehend. "All within the green," he said softly. "No permanent frostbite. No permanent damage." Shortly after that, Aenea slipped out of the blanket and helped me to sit up, putting 2 of the horror-frosted packs... Sorry. Shortly after... I just stumbled in general. No special stumble this time. Just lost my breath. Shortly after that, Aenea slipped out of the blanket and helped me sit up, putting 2 of the horror-frosted packs behind my head and back. She set water to boiling over the glowing cube, made mugs of steaming tea, and held one to my lips. I could move my hands by then, even flex my fingers, but the pain there was too great to grasp anything successfully. "Endymion," said Bettik, crouching just outside the tent. "I am prepared to transmit the detonation code." I nodded. "There may be falling debris, sir," he added. I nodded again. We had discussed the risk of that. The shaped charges should shatter just the ice walls ahead of us, but the resulting seismic vibrations through the ice might well bring the entire glacier of frozen atmosphere down around us, driving the raft to the shallow bottom and entombing us there. We had judged it worth the risk. Now I glanced up at the frost-rimmed interior of the micro-tent and smiled at the thought that this would give us any shelter. I nodded a 3rd time, urging him to go ahead. The sound of the blast was more subdued than I expected, much less noisy than the concomitant tumble of ice blocks and stalactites and the wild surging of the river itself. For a second I thought that we were going to be lifted and crushed against the cave ceiling as wave after wave of pressure-propelled and ice-displaced river water surged under the raft. We huddled on our little stone hearth, trying to stay out of the frigid water, and riding the bucking logs like passengers on a storm-tossed life dinghy. Eventually, the surging and rumbling calmed itself. The violent maneuvers had snapped our steering oar, flung one of the push-poles away, dislodged us from our safe haven, and floated us downstream to the ice wall. To where the ice wall used to be. The charges had done their job much as we had planned. The cavern they had created was low and jagged, but as probing it with the flashlight lasers showed, it appeared to go through to the open channel beyond. Aenea cheered. Bettik patted me on the back. I am ashamed to admit that I may have wept again. It was not so easy a victory as it first seemed. Fallen ice blocks and surviving columns of ice still blocked parts of the passage, and even after the initial rush of ice into the breach slowed a bit, it meant heavy going with the surviving push-pole and frequent pauses as Bettik hacked away at icy obstacles with the axe. Half an hour into this effort, I staggered to the front of our battered raft and gestured that it was my turn with the axe. "Are you sure, Endymion?" asked the blue-skinned man. "Quite sure," I said carefully, forcing my cold tongue and jaw to enunciate properly. The work with the axe soon warmed me to the point that the last of the shaking stopped. I could feel the terrible bruises and scrapes where the ice ceiling had battered me, but I would deal with those pains later. Finally, we hacked our way through the last bars of ice to float into the open current. The 3 of us pounded sock mittens together for a moment, but then retreated to huddle near the heating cube, and to play the hand lamps on either side as new scenery floated by. The new scenery was identical to the old. Vertical walls of ice on either side, stalactites threatening to drop on us at any moment, the rushing black water. "Maybe it will stay open all the way to the next arch," said Aenea, and the fog of her breath remained in the air like a promise. We all stood up as the raft swept around the bend in the ice-buried river. For a moment it was confusion, as Bettik used the pole and I used the shattered stub of the steering oar to fend us off the port side wall. Then we were in the central current again and picking up speed. "Oh," said the girl from where she stood at the front of the raft. Her tone told us everything. The river went another 60 meters or so, narrowed, and ended at a second ice wall. It was Aenea's idea to send the catalogued bracelet ahead as a scout. "It has the video microbead," she said. "But we have no monitor," I pointed out, "and it can't send the video feed to the ship." Aenea was shaking her head. "No, but the catalogue itself can see. It can tell us what it sees." "Yes," I said, finally understanding. "But is it smart enough without the ship AI behind it to understand what it sees?" "Shall we ask it?" said Bettik, who had retrieved the bracelet from my pack. We reactivated the thing and asked it. It assured us, in that almost arrogant ship's voice, that it was quite capable of processing its visual data and relaying its analysis to us via the comm band. It also assured us that although it could not float and had not learned to swim, it was completely waterproof. Aenea used the flashlight laser to cut off the end of one of the logs, pounded nails and pivot bolt rings to hold the bracelet in place around it, and added a hook ring for the climbing rope. She used a double half hitch to secure the line. "We should have used this for the first ice wall," I said. She smiled. Her cap was rimmed with frost. Actual icicles hung on the short brim. "The bracelet might have had some trouble setting the charges," she said. I realized as she spoke that the child was very weary. "Good luck," I said idiotically as we tossed the braceleted log into the river. The comm log had the good grace not to respond. It was swept under the ice wall almost immediately. We brought the heating cube forward and crouched near it as Bettik let out the line. It turned up the volume of the comm unit speakers. I turned up the volume of the comm unit speakers, and none of us said a word as the line snaked out and the tinny voice of the comm log reported back. 10 meters, crevasses above, but none wider than 6 centimeters. No end to the ice. 20 meters, ice continues. 50 meters, ice. 75 meters, no end in sight. 100 meters, ice. The comm log was at the end of its tether. We spliced on our last length of climbing rope. 150 meters. Ice. 180 meters. Ice. 200 meters. Ice. We were out of rope and out of hope. I began hauling in the comm log. Even though my hands were sensate and awkwardly functional now, it was difficult for me to haul the essentially weightless bracelet back upstream, so vicious was the current and heavy the ice-laden rope. But once again I had difficulty imagining the effort Bettik had put forth in saving me. The line was almost too stiff to curl. We had to chip away the ice from around the comm log when it was finally hauled aboard. "Although the cold depletes my power unit and the ice covers my visual pickups," chirped the bracelet, "I am willing and able to continue the exploration." "No, thank you," Bettik said politely, turning off the device and returning it to me. The metal was too cold to handle, even with my sock mittens on. I dropped the bangle into the frosted backpack. We wouldn't have had enough plastique for 50 meters of ice," I said. We wouldn't have had enough plastique for 50 meters of ice," I said. My voice was absolutely calm. Even the shivering had stopped, and I realized that it was because of the absolute unblinking clarity of the death sentence that had just descended upon us. There was, I realize now, another reason for that oasis of calm amid the desert of pain and hopelessness there. It was the warmth. The remembered warmth. The flow of life from those two people to me, my acceptance of it, the sacred communion sense of it. Now, in the lanterned darkness, we went ahead with the urgent business of attempting to stay alive, discussing impossible options such as using the plasma rifle to blast a way through, discarding impossible options, and discussing more of the same. But all the while in that cold, dark pit of confusion and rising hopelessness, the core of warmth that had been breathed back into me from these two friends kept me calm, even as their human proximity had kept me alive. In the difficult times to come, and even now as I write this, even while expecting death's stealthy arrival by cyanide on every breath I take, that memory of shared warmth, that first total sharing of vitality, keeps me calm and steady through the storm of human fears. We decided to pole the raft back the length of the new channel, seeking some overlooked crevasse or niche or air shaft. It seemed hopeless, but perhaps a shade less hopeless than leaving the raft pressed up against this terminal icefall. We found it right below where the river had made its dogleg to the right. Evidently, we had been too busy fending off the ice walls and regaining the center current to notice the narrow rift in the jagged ice along what had been our starboard side. Although we were searching diligently, we would not have discovered the narrow opening without the tight beam of the flashlight laser. Our lantern light, twisted by crystal facet and hanging ice, passed right over it. Common sense told us that this was just another folding in the ice, a horizontal equivalent of the vertical crevasses I had found in the ice ceiling, a breathing space leading nowhere. Our need for hope prayed that common sense was wrong. The opening, fold, whatever, was less than a meter wide and opened onto air almost 2 meters above the river's surface. Poling closer, we could see by laser light that either the opening ended or its narrowing corridor bent out of sight less than 3 meters in. Common sense told us that it was the end of the icy cul-de-sac. Once again, we ignored common sense. While Aenea leaned into the long pole, straining to hold the raft in place against the churning water, Bettik boosted me up. I used the claw end of our hammer as a climbing tool, chipping it deep into the ice floor of the narrow defile and pulling myself up by speed and desperation. Once up there on my hands and knees, panting and weak, I caught my breath, stood, and waved down to the others. They would wait for my report. The narrow ice tunnel bent sharply to the right. I aimed the flashlight laser down this second corridor with rising hope. Another ice wall reflected back the red beam, but this time there did not seem to be a bend in the tunnel. No, wait. As I moved down the second corridor, stooping low as the ice ceiling lowered, I realized that the tunnel rose steeply just beyond this point. The light had been shining on the floor of the icy ramp. Depth perception did not exist here. I guess that makes sense, given everything's kind of the same color. Just glossy white, with no light source beyond whatever you're emitting. Squeezing through the tight space, I crawled on all fours for a dozen meters, boots scrabbling on the jagged ice. I thought of the shop in Okay. I don't know why that's giving me trouble. I thought of the shop in echoing, empty New Jerusalem where I had bought those boots, leaving my hospital slippers behind and a handful of Hyperion script on the counter, and tried to remember if there had been any ice crampons for sale in the camping section there. Too late now. At one point I had to slither on my belly, once again sure that the corridor was going to end within a meter, but this time it turned sharply to the left and ran straight and level, deep into the ice, for 20 more meters or so before angling right and climbing again. Panting, shaking with excitement, I jogged, slid, and claw-hammered my way back downhill to the opening. The laser beam cast back countless reflections of my excited expression from the clear ice. Aenea and Bettik had begun packing necessary equipment as soon as I had disappeared from sight. The girl had already been boosted to the ice niche and was setting aside gear as Bettik tossed it up. We shouted instructions and suggestions to one another. Everything seemed necessary: sleeping bags, thermal blanket, the folded tent, which could be compressed to only a third of its former tiny size due to the ice and frost on it, heating cube, inertial compass, weapons, hand lamps. In the end, we had most of the raft's gear on the landing. We argued some more, the exercise and hot air of it keeping us warm for a minute, then chose just what was necessary and what could fit in our packs and shoulder bags. I carried the pistol on my belt and lashed the plasma rifle on my pack. Bettik agreed to carry the shotgun, its ammunition topping off his already bulging pack. Luckily, the packs were empty of clothes. We were wearing everything we owned, so we loaded up on food packs and gear. Aenea and the android kept the comm units. I slid the still icy comm log onto my bulky wrist. Despite the precaution, we had no intention of losing sight of one another. I was worried about the raft drifting away. The lodged push-pole and shattered steering oar would not hold it for long, but Bettik solved that in a moment by rigging bow and stern lines, melting niches in the ice wall with the flashlight laser, and tying the lines around solid ice cleats. Before we started up the narrow ice corridor, I took a final look at our faithful raft, doubtful that we would ever see it again. It was a pathetic sight. The stone hearth was still in place, but the steering oar was in splinters. Our lantern mast in the bow had been broken and splintered. The leading edges had been bashed about, and the logs on both sides were all but splintered. The stern was awash, and the entire vessel was filmed with ice and half hidden by the icy vapors that swirled around us. I nodded my gratitude and farewell to the sad wreck, turned, and led the way to the right and up, pushing the heavy pack and bulging shoulder bag ahead of me during the lowest and narrowest bit. I had feared that the corridor would run to an end a few meters beyond where I had explored, but 30 minutes of climbing, crawling, sliding, and outright scrambling led to more tunnels, more turns, and always climbing. Even though the exertion kept us alive, if not actually warm, each of us could feel the invasive cold making gains on us. Sooner or later, exhaustion would claim us, and we would have to stop, set our rolled mats and sleeping bags out, and see if we would awaken after sleeping in such cold. But not yet. Passing chocolate bars back, Passing chocolate bars back, pausing to thaw the ice in one of our canteens by passing the laser beam across it at its widest setting, I said, "Not much farther now." "Not much farther to what?" asked Aenea from beneath her crest of frost and ice. "We can't be near the surface yet. We haven't climbed that far." "Not much farther to something interesting," I said. As soon as I spoke, the vapor from my breath froze to the front of my jacket and the stubble on my chin. I knew that my eyebrows were dripping ice. "Interesting," repeated the girl, sounding dubious. I understood. So far, interesting had done its best to get us killed. An hour later, we had paused to heat some food over the cube, which had to be rigged carefully so it would not melt its way through the ice floor while heating our pot of stew, and I was consulting in my inertial compass to get some idea of how far we had come and how high we'd climbed, when Bettik said, "Quiet." All three of us seemed to be holding our breath for minutes. Finally, Aenea whispered, "What? I don't hear anything." It was a miracle that we could hear each other when we shouted. Our heads were so wrapped about with makeshift scarves and balaclavas. Bettik frowned and held his finger to his lips for silence. After a moment he whispered, "Footsteps, and they're coming this way." "39. On Pacem, the main interrogation center for the Holy Roman Office of the Universal Inquisition is not in the Vatican proper, but in the great heap of stone called Castel Sant'Angelo, a massive circular fort begun as Hadrian's tomb in AD 135, connected to the Aurelian Wall in AD 271 to become the most important fortress in Rome, and one of the few buildings of Rome to be moved with the Vatican when the Church evacuated its offices from Old Earth in the last days before the planet's collapse into the core gobbling black hole. The castle, actually a conical monolith of moat-surrounded stones. Let's try that again. The castle, actually a conical monolith of moat-surrounded stones, became important to the Church during the plague year of AD 587, when Gregory the Great, while leading a prayer procession beseeching God to end the plague, had a vision of Michael the Archangel atop the tomb. Later, Castel Sant'Angelo sheltered popes from angry mobs, offered its dank cells and torture chambers to such perceived enemies of the Church as Benvenuto Cellini, and, in its nearly 3,000 years of existence, had proved itself impervious to both barbarian invasion and nuclear explosion. It now sits like a low gray mountain in the center of the only open land remaining within the busy triangle of highways, buildings, and administrative centers running between the Vatican, the Pax Administrative City, and the spaceport. Father-Captain deSoya presents himself within 20 minutes before his 7:30 appointment. His 0730 appointment, I thought it was 0700. Father-Captain deSoya presents himself 20 minutes before his 0730 appointment and is given a badge that will guide him through the sweating, windowless vaults and corridors of the castle. The frescoes, beautiful furnishings, and airy loggias, set there by popes of the Middle Ages, have long since faded and fallen into disrepair. Castel Sant'Angelo has once again taken on the character of a tomb and fortress. deSoya knows that a fortified passage from the Vatican to the castle had been brought along from Old Earth, and one of the purposes of the Holy Office in the past 2 centuries has been to supply Castel Sant'Angelo with modern weapons and defenses so that it might still offer quick refuge to the Pope should interstellar war come to Pacem. The walk takes the full 20 minutes, and he must pass through frequent checkpoints and security doors, each guarded not by the brightly garbed Swiss Guard police of the Vatican, but by the black and silver uniformed security forces of the Holy Office. The interrogation cell itself is infinitely less dreary than the ancient corridors and stairs that lead to it. 2 of the 3 interior stone walls are brightened by smart glass panels that glow a soft yellow. 2 sun bundles spread sunlight from their collector on the roof 30 meters above. The Spartan room is furnished by a modern conference table. deSoya's chair sits opposite that of his 5 inquisitors, but is identical to theirs in design and comfort. A standard office work center with keyboards, data screens, disk key plate, and virtual inputs, and a sideboard with a coffee urn and breakfast rolls. deSoya has to wait only a minute before the inquisitors arrive. The cardinals, 1 Jesuit, 1 Dominican, and 3 legionaries of Christ, introduce themselves and shake hands. deSoya has worn his black Pax Fleet dress uniform with its Roman collar, and it stands in contrast to the crimson Holy Office tunics with their black labeled collars. There are a few niceties. A moment's conversation about deSoya's health and successful resurrection, offers of food and coffee. deSoya accepts the coffee, and then they take their seats. In the tradition of the early days of the Holy Office, and as has been the custom in the renewed Church when priests are the subject of investigation, let's just try this from the top. Sorry. In the tradition, there we go. In the tradition of the early days of the Holy Office, and as has been the custom in the renewed Church when priests are the subject of investigation, the discussion is held in Latin. Only one of the 5 cardinals on the panel actually speaks. The questions are polite, formal, and invariably phrased in the third person. At the end of the interview, transcripts in Latin and web English are given to the interview subject. Inquisitor. Has Father-Captain deSoya reported success in finding and detaining the child known as Aenea? FC deSoya. I have had contact with the child. I have not succeeded in detaining her. Inquisitor. Let him say what the meaning of contact is within this context. FC deSoya. I have twice intercepted the ship which carried the child away from Hyperion, once in Parvati's system, a second time near and on Renaissance Vector. Inquisitor. These successful attempts at taking the child into custody have been recorded and are duly entered into the record. Is it his contention that the child would have died by her own hand in Parvati's system before the specially trained Swiss Guard troops aboard his ship could have forced entry and taken the child into protective custody? FC in the boarding operation. FC deSoya. At the time they wanted to go. They had trained hard and were ready. It was my opinion at the time, however, that the risk of the girl harming herself was too great. Inquisitor. And was this the same reason he did not intercept the runaway ship prior to its entering of the atmosphere of the world known as Renaissance Vector? FC deSoya. No. In that instance, the girl said that she was landing on the planet. It seemed safer for everyone concerned to allow her to do so before taking her into custody. Inquisitor. And yet, when the aforementioned ship approached the dormant Farcaster portal on Renaissance Vector, the priest-captain ordered various ships in the fleet and air forces to fire on the child's ship. Is this correct? FC deSoya. Yes. Inquisitor. Is it his contention, then, that this command held no danger of harming the girl? FC deSoya. No. I knew there was such a risk. I knew there was a risk. However, when I realized that the girl's ship was headed for the Farcaster portal, it was my firm belief that we would lose her if we did not attempt to disable her spacecraft. Inquisitor. Did he have some knowledge that the Farcaster portal along the river would activate itself after almost 3 centuries of dormancy? FC deSoya. No knowledge. A sudden intuition. A hunch. Inquisitor. Is he in the habit of risking the success or failure of a mission labeled the highest priority by the Holy Father himself, on a hunch? FC deSoya. I am not in the habit of being sent on a mission of the highest priority of the Holy Father. I am not in the habit of being sent on a mission of the highest priority by the Holy Father. In certain instances where my ships have been in combat, I have made command decisions based upon insights which would not have seemed totally logical outside the context of my experience and training. Inquisitor. Is he saying that knowledge of a Farcaster's renewed activity some 274 years after the fall of the web which sustained them is within the context of his experience and training? FC deSoya. No, it was a hunch. Inquisitor. Is he aware of the expense of the combined fleet operation in Renaissance system? FC deSoya. I know it was considerable. Inquisitor. Is he aware that several ships of the line were delayed in carrying out their orders from Pax Fleet Command, orders which were sending them to vital trouble spots along this so-called Great Wall of our defensive perimeter against the invading ousters? FC deSoya. I was aware that ships were delayed in Renaissance system upon my order. Yes. Inquisitor. On the world of Mare Infinitus, the Father-Captain saw fit to arrest several Pax officers. FC deSoya. Yes. Inquisitor. And to administer truth-tell and other restrictive psychotropic drugs to these officers without due process or the advice of the Pax and Church authorities on Mare Infinitus? FC deSoya. Yes. Inquisitor. Is it his contention that the papal disci conferred upon him to carry out his mission and... Is it his contention that the papal disci conferred upon him to carry out his mission of finding the child also authorized him to arrest Pax officers and carry out such interrogation without due process of military courts or provided counsel? FC deSoya. Yes, it was and is my understanding that the papal disci gave me full authorization in the field for whatever command decision I deemed necessary in the completion of this mission. Inquisitor. Is it his contention, then, that the arrest of these Pax officers will lead to the successful detention of the child named Aenea? F.C. deSoya, my investigation was necessary to determine the truth of the events surrounding the probable passage of that child from Farcaster to Farcaster on Mare Infinitus. During the course of that investigation, it became apparent that the director of the platform on which the events occurred had been lying to his superiors, covering up elements of the incident involving the girl's traveling companion, and also had been involved in the treasonable deaths with the poachers in those waters. At the conclusion of our investigation, I turned over the officers and men who had been involved to the Pax garrison for due process handling within the Fleet Code of Military Justice. Inquisitor, and did he feel that his treatment of Bishop Melandriano was also justified under the requirements of the investigation? F.C. deSoya, despite the explanations of the need for swift action, Bishop Melandriano objected to our investigation on Platform Station 326 Mid-Littoral. He tried to stop the investigation from a distance, despite direct orders to cooperate from his superior, Archbishop Jane Kelly. Inquisitor, is it the Father-Captain's contention that Archbishop Kelly offered her help in soliciting the cooperation of Bishop Melandriano? F.C. deSoya, no, I sought her help. Inquisitor, in truth, did the Father-Captain not invoke the authority of the papal disci in compelling Archbishop Kelly to intervene on the behalf of the investigation? F.C. deSoya, yes. Inquisitor, can he state the events which occurred after Bishop Melandriano came in person to Platform Station 326 Mid-Littoral? F.C. deSoya, Bishop Melandriano was in a rage. He ordered the Pax troops guarding my prisoners. Inquisitor, when the Father-Captain refers to my prisoners, he means the former director and Pax officers of the platform? F.C. deSoya, yes. Inquisitor, he may continue. F.C. deSoya, Bishop Melandriano ordered the Pax troops I had brought in to release Captain Powell and the others. I countermanded the order. Bishop Melandriano refused to recognize my authority as delegated by the papal disci. I had the bishop put under temporary arrest and transported to the Jesuit monastery on a platform 600 kilometers from the planet's south pole. Storms and other contingencies prevented the bishop from leaving for several days. By the time he did, my investigation was complete. Inquisitor, and what did the investigation purport to show? F.C. deSoya, among other things, it showed that Bishop Melandriano had been receiving large payments of cash from the poachers within the jurisdiction of Platform Station 326 Mid-Littoral. It also showed that Director Powell of the platform had been under the direction of Bishop Melandriano in carrying out illegal activities with the poachers and in extorting money from the off-world fishermen. Inquisitor, did the Father-Captain confront Bishop Melandriano with these allegations? F.C. deSoya, no. Inquisitor, did he bring them to the attention of Archbishop Kelly? F.C. deSoya, no. Inquisitor, did he bring them to the attention of the ranking Pax garrison commander? F.C. deSoya, no. Inquisitor, can he explain these omissions of action as required by the Pax Fleet Code of Conduct and the rules of the Church and Society of Jesus? F.C. deSoya, the bishop's involvement in these crimes was not the focus of my investigation. I turned Captain Powell and the others over to the garrison commander because I knew their cases would be dealt with quickly and fairly under the Fleet Code of Military Justice. I also knew that any complaints against Bishop Melandriano, whether filed under Pax civil suit or church judicial procedures, would require my presence on Mare Infinitus for weeks and months. The mission could not wait for that. I judged the bishop's corruption less important than pursuing the girl. Inquisitor, he understands the seriousness of these unsubstantiated I'm going to try this again. Inquisitor, he understands the seriousness of these unsubstantiated and undocumented charges against a bishop of the Roman Catholic Church? F.C. deSoya, yes. Inquisitor, and what led him to abandon his former search pattern and take the Archangel Courier Raphael to the ouster-controlled Hebron system? F.C. deSoya, again, a hunch. Inquisitor, he shall elaborate. F.C. deSoya, I did not know where the girl had farcast after Renaissance Vector. Logic dictates that the ship had been left behind somewhere and they had continued on the River Tethys by other means. The hawking mat, perhaps, more likely by boat or raft. Certain evidence gathered in the investigation of the girl's flight prior to and during the Mare Infinitus crossing suggested a connection with the ousters. Inquisitor. He shall elaborate. F.C. deSoya. First, the spacecraft. It was of hegemony design, a private interstellar spacecraft, if such a thing can be believed. A private interstellar spacecraft, if such a thing can be believed. Only a few were given out during the history of the hegemony. The one most closely resembling the ship we encountered was presented to a certain hegemony consul some decades before the fall. This consul was later immortalized in the epic poem, the Cantos, composed by the former Hyperion pilgrim, Martin Silenus. In the Cantos, the consul tells a tale of betraying the hegemony by spying for the ousters. Inquisitor. He shall continue. deSoya. There were other connections. Sergeant Gregorius was sent to the world of Hyperion with certain forensic evidence which identified the man believed to have been traveling with the child. It is one Raul Endymion, a native of Hyperion and former member of the Hyperion Home Guard. There are certain connections of the name Endymion to works by the girl's father, the Keats Cybrid abomination. Once again, we come to the Cantos. Inquisitor. He will continue. Father-Captain deSoya. Well, there was another connection. The flying device captured after the escape and possible shooting of Raul Endymion on Mare Infinitus. Inquisitor. Why does he say the possible shooting? Reports from all eyewitnesses on the platform say the suspect was shot and fell into the sea. F.C. deSoya. Lieutenant Belius had fallen into the ocean earlier, yet his blood and tissue fragments were found on the hawking mat. Only a small portion of blood identified as having the DNA pattern of Raul Endymion was found on the flying mat. It is my theory that Endymion either tried to rescue Lieutenant Belius from the sea or was surprised by him somehow, that the two fought on the mat, and that the real suspect, Raul Endymion, was wounded and fell from the mat before the guards fired. I believe it was Lieutenant Belius who died from flechette fire. Inquisitor. Does he have any proof, other than the blood and tissue samples, which might just as easily have come from Raul Endymion pausing long enough in his escape flight to... I'm going to just try this again. Does he have any proof, other than blood and tissue samples, which might just as easily have come from Raul Endymion pausing long enough in his escape flight to murder Lieutenant Belius? F.C. deSoya. No. Inquisitor. He shall continue. F.C. deSoya. The other reason I suspected an ouster connection was the hawking mat. Forensic studies show it to be very old, perhaps old enough to be the famous mat used by shipmen Marin Aspic and Siri on the world of Maui Covenant. Once again, there is a connection to the Hyperion pilgrimage and stories related in the Silenus Cantos. Inquisitor. He shall continue. F.C. deSoya. That's all. I thought that we could get to Hebron without encountering an ouster swarm. They often abandon the systems they win in combat. Obviously, my hunch was wrong this time. It cost Lancer Rettig his life. For that, I am deeply and truly sorry. Inquisitor. So his contention is that the upshot of the investigation he carried out at such expense and such pain and embarrassment to Bishop Melandriano was successful because several items seemed to connect the poem called the Cantos, which in turn had a slight connection to the ousters. F.C. deSoya. Essentially, yes. Inquisitor. Is the Father-Captain aware that the poem called the Cantos is on the Index of Prohibited Books and has been so for more than a century and a half? F.C. deSoya. Yes. Inquisitor. Does he admit to having read the book? F.C. deSoya. Yes. Inquisitor. Does he remember the punishment within the Society of Jesus for willfully violating the Index of Prohibited Books? F.C. deSoya. Yes. It is banishment from the Society. Inquisitor. And does he recall the maximum punishment listed under the Church Canon of Peace and Justice set upon those in the body of Christ for willful violations of restrictions offered through the Index of Prohibited Books? F.C. deSoya. Excommunication. Inquisitor. The Father-Captain is released to his quarters at the Vatican Rectory of the Legionaries of Christ, and is requested to remain there until recalled for further testimony before this panel or as otherwise directed. We do so abjure, swear, promise, and bind our brother in Christ. Through the power of the Holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Roman Church do we so compel and abjure thee. In Jesus' name we speak. F.C. deSoya. Thank you, most eminent and reverend Lord Cardinal, Inquisitors. I shall await word.
And that is where we will call it for today.
So yeah, we end with an inquisitorial inquisition. Or something. The Inquisition. Etc. So yeah, what are those footsteps about? You'll just have to find out next time. I don't know when next time will be. It will be sometime next week, but I haven't sorted out my schedule yet. I will know on Friday, and I'll post something. I'll post something to that effect on Friday as soon as I know, so that people can have at least a week's warning to plan. It'll be on the Discord. Otherwise, I guess if you're subscribed, it'll probably tell you when I go live. I don't actually know how that works, because I don't pay much attention to it. I'm not saying that to shill the channel or anything, just I think that's how it works, is it'll give you an alert saying, hey, so-and-so showed up. So-and-so is doing whatever. But I don't know for sure. I still target about 12 noon U.S. East Coast time, Eastern Standard Time / daily time. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Exactly. Did you think the Inquisition was going to pop up here? We had one hint earlier. One. And it was in that chapter. It was in the very chapter that it occurred. He couldn't help himself. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. So yeah, our boy Federico deSoya is caught in an inquisition. You've probably noticed by now that the tale is being told in a pattern of roughly one chapter Raul, Aenea, Bettik, and then one chapter Federico deSoya. As I recall, that changes a bit in the second book, a little, but it is mostly consistent for the first book. Speaking of which, how close are we to the second book? We're getting there. We are getting there. Let me put a marker in where that's at. Geez, probably only like 2 more streams. Maybe 3. More like 3. There'll be shorter ones probably. Anyway, let me get something. Here we go. I knew I had another one floating around. I've got so many bookmarks. There's a couple bookstores that I go to occasionally that mom and pop type affairs. Some of which have been around a while, some of which aren't. Most of which aren't like part of a major chain. And some of them are like, oh, you're buying books, let's give you like 15 bookmarks. So they're floating around. I just like don't always save them in the same place. He says as he drops the bookmark again. Fortunately, I have another one. Fight me. One will replace it. They are legion. But yeah, we'll find out what's going on in those ice caves with the footsteps. Could it be one of these frost wraiths? We'll find out. Practically the entire tenor of the section of Raul, Endymion, and Aenea and Bettik in the ice caves is ripped almost whole cloth into by a later author, Peter F. Hamilton, into one of his books, which has a very similar. Someone has to go on a road trip, and it involves basically bumming around to different worlds down a pathway of some sort. It's not a river. It's like ferry paths. They're not ferries. They're space otters, I think, if memory serves. Fairy space otters. Yes. No, I'm pretty sure I'm remembering correctly. And it's in, it's either Pandora's Star or Judas Unchained. I can't remember which. It's not quite the same. It's just very cold place, ice monsters, and that's kind of it. I don't think it's in a cave. And things are radically different after like the next couple chapters, or next chapter or two of that segment. They're very surface level similarities. The actual thrust of the book and the direction it's going is radically different, but he was like, this is too cool, I have to put it in mine. I can let other people judge whether that's hacky or not. It's not as hacky as what Timothy Zahn did when he literally ripped off, I think it was the Rooks of Saturn, or Rocks of Saturn, or Saturn Rock. Yeah. He rips off that book for, I think it's Manta's Journey, and it's virtually identical, except it's on Jupiter, not Saturn. Once I realized that there was a book that he had just stolen from, I was eternally disappointed. I was like, man, he'll never win back that trust. Anyway, I'll let other people determine whether it's hacky. I will get around to reading a bunch of Peter F. Hamilton eventually. They have a lot of sex, frequently. He tends to be fairly... Like, Dan Simmons is edgy, but sex is pretty restrained, but Peter F. Hamilton's like, yeah, and then they got to frickin'. So we'll see. I don't have a problem with that myself, but, like, YouTube might... I don't know what the algorithm does with all that. So yeah, hopefully we'll have... there will be some streams next week, I just don't know when they are yet. I will know on Friday. Tomorrow. I will know tomorrow. Anything else? Anything else salient? As I've mentioned before, the game plan after this is probably to move almost straight on to... Cytine by C.J. Cherry, which is not about cyber teens. It is about a planet. Well, it's not about cyber teens. It's business time. But yeah. So it's not this week, but I think next week we'll be certainly next week at some point we'll be introduced to a new recurring character in the books. For the remainder of the books, and they are quite a character. I haven't quite decided how I'm going to handle them yet, but they are very memorable, with some very memorable scenes. Let's see. So after we do Cytine, after we finish this, I might do a Greg Egan in between this and Cytine, and then do Cytine. I'll figure it out. Just to have something to break it up. And then Cytine, and then probably I'll just do Regenesis right after, and I'll just move the project forward. That's kind of what I'm thinking. After that, I get to sit back and think about what I'm going to do. But that's kind of what I've booked myself out as, and that's going to be months. Depending on the timing of when we get done, given that it's already halfway through January and we're not halfway through the book yet. We're about a third, maybe. A little less. Third adjacent. And it's been 7 installments, I think. Let's see. Assuming I can get like 3 per week in. Let's assume 2 per week. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah. We'll see. Because there was something I kind of wanted to do for Black History Month. Well, if timing works out, I could do it for like Juneteenth or something. Some good fun to be had, anyway. Oh my gosh, it is a Flight of the Conchords song, isn't it? It's business time. The line I remember most from that is, that's why they call them business socks. Anyway, that'll call it for today. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, the usual platitudes, if that's what we're calling those. And I'll see you all in the next couple days, probably. Might have Saturday. Yep. Again, I'll post that on the Discord. I'll make that clear. I should probably make like a schedules channel, or I could do it under announcements. I don't know. Whatever. It'll happen. See you all later. Toodaloo!